Good evening, everybody. I'm Naveen Koshi, and joining me here is Frederike Haag and Juwana Jenkins. Welcome to Mind Matter Podcasts. Juwana Jenkins has immense experience in the field of corporate training, and she has a bachelor at Penn State University with one of her minors as Women's Studies, after which she completed her master's in professional and business communication. Um, our topic today is gender equality in the workplace, and we want to get into it from sort of a corporate, uh, you know, context. When we look at the corporate sector in the modern age, we see leadership positions being predominantly filled up by men. And what, according to you, are some of the biggest challenges that women face in the modern workplace?
I would say that there are a number of challenges that women face in the modern workplace, but I would say it begins before the workplace. I think it begins with socialization.
I see.
And I think it begins with expectations. And it begins with upbringing and education, and then it plays out even more so in the workplace. So when we see that C-suite has fewer men, we see that the process actually begins before that, and that number one, the traits that are supported and that are promoted are not necessarily those that are ingrained in young girls or young women. And when those behaviors are demonstrated, they are not necessarily embraced, but may be stated as being bossy or other adjectives which are not encouraging of taking leadership roles. Not in the playground setting where young boys are encouraged to take the lead, step up to the plate, man up, whereas young girls are being told that they need to be supportive, help each other, get along, and be a good girl. And so those things throughout the elementary schools, the high schools, and then when people finally get to the workplace, there's a whole lot of training that's taken place in socialization, so that finally when you have those 18, 21, 25 years of socialization from the home, from the education, and then they start to play out as adults, you see women not being encouraged and supported to speak up, speak out, and as a result be promoted, to get opportunities and roles and responsibilities and projects where they have the opportunity to take the role, mentoring and support, so that all those things that lead to the C-suite are not in place to the same degree, so that seeing a woman in the C-suite is exceptional as compared to standard.
I see. And you're suggesting that education is a significant part, like a player to this entire thing. And so what do you think are the problems that are involved in the education system that can be, the variables that can be changed around so that these social differences between men and women can sort of lead into a more equal workplace, if that's possible?
Right. From the research that I've done, from the reading that I've done to prepare for the corporate training that I do, it goes back to, let's say, the elementary school place, or even before that, when children act out stereotypical gender roles, and a young boy is being more boisterous or energetic, the phrase "boys will be boys, what can you expect?" Whereas if a young girl were acting out that way, she has a role of a tomboy, or she's being disruptive and keep your place. So that boys have more energy and are more dynamic, well, what can you expect? But if a girl is acting out in the same way, then that's something where she's acting out of place. And so getting that message early on, I am rewarded when I keep still, I play nice, and I'm helpful, and I get attention when I am acting out, being the dominant force in the classroom, and I'm getting support or attention. So two very different messages for potentially the same behavior, and the clues that we get about how we get our rewards in society. and them being compounded as we go through education. I teach career development at this university in addition to the corporate training that I've done, for example, for speaking to women's interest networks about behavior that could be potential roadblocks and how to address those things. And that experience that I have in the corporate setting, I take back into the classroom. And when I see bright, intelligent, soft-spoken women who have brilliant ideas, but I have to lean in to hear them, and then there's someone else who may be more boisterous, not saying the same amount of content or quality, but gets the dominant attention, I say to the young women, speak up.
Mm-hmm.
And speak so that you're heard, and so that I and everyone in this room can hear you. Because there are so many times that it's not necessarily the first person or the best person, but the loudest person who gets heard. And so understanding that it may not be what we've been rewarded for, but in that workplace, being heard, being articulate, being forthright does make a difference. And if our education and our socialization has not prepared women for that, then they need to prepare for a new reality if they want a different outcome for their careers.
I see. So I see that you're suggesting that society is sort of rewarding mechanisms through which men and women act differently in society. So are you also suggesting that when genetically speaking, there is lesser probability that such traits are not genetic, rather?
What I'm saying is that even if the male and female brain is wired differently, there is a continuum. And we're talking about gender roles. And we're learning in this day and age that gender is fluid. And it's not a black and white, all or nothing issue. And that a woman can have qualities and traits that are typically ascribed and prescribed as being masculine, and vice versa. And that each individual needs to know and understand the strengths and challenges that they have and work towards those. Unfortunately, society is not really that progressive overall and has prescribed notions about what a good boy or a good man does and how a good girl or how a good woman behaves. And when someone acts outside of those norms, society, whether that is an authority figure at home or at school or in the workplace, gives some indication this is acceptable based on my expectations and should be rewarded, or not acceptable and should be censored in some way, shape, or form. So what I'm saying, these behaviors have been, there's nature and then there's nurture, and they both play a role together.
So does that mean that women technically have some sort of innate disadvantage when it comes to the workplace? Because they're, or at least is that a factor that plays into that?
Or may I say that the workplace has an innate disadvantage for not incorporating the strengths of women?
Right. So do you think that we would need to like restructure it from the ground up if we were to really give the advantage to women rather than men?
We're not working to give the advantage to anybody.
Okay.
We're working to incorporate the strengths of all to balance the challenges and the weaknesses of others. Part of the corporate training that I do is on diversity and inclusion. So it's not about the balance was too much in one side, so we need to go all the way to the other side. That's not the idea at all. But it's recognizing that when you have like-minded people, it's easier to get along, but it's easier to have blind spots that no one can recognize or realize. And it's that person who is that minority voice, that different opinion that can provide added value and strength. We've seen that homogenous groups get along easier, but their results are not as robust as diverse groups, which have more challenges at the beginning, but have better results in the end. That's what I'm talking about. We can talk about women, we can talk about gender, we can talk about ethnicity, we can talk about religion, we can talk about nationality. But strength comes from diversity.
Do you face a lot of opposition when you propose things like that in the training, or is it just...
No, actually, because the reality is that everyone is different
Right,
in some way, shape, or form. And it's not just women, and this is something that I'm keenly aware of. It's women and other underrepresented groups that are making a statement, but men also feel the pinch of the limiting roles that they're in. And whether it's come to the forefront in discussion that by having all these expectations placed upon men, those are also unrealistic.
Right.
So both genders are confined by the expectations. And as a result, we lose the richness that can be given by both being free to give according to their skills.
Do you mind expanding on, you said men are confined by some of the restrictions by the system. Could you expand on that?
In the conversation about women feeling that they're not able to achieve according to their desires, that the opportunities are limited, there is another part of the conversation where men are saying, well, it's not so easy for me either. It's not so easy for me to go according to the traditionally ascribed gender roles. You know, there are times where I feel and state something that's not traditionally associated with masculinity, where I feel less likely to speak up, where I don't know 100% what I'm doing, where I'm confused or I'm nervous or I'm scared, but never let it show. And that is a weight and that is a burden that people have to carry. But they man up, and all the connotations that has, and all of the downsides that has. I think as women look at the benefits of men, unfortunately, we forget the disadvantages that they have as well. I think that's really missing in the conversation that we're having right now. And that's the importance of diversity and inclusion. It's not an either or, it's both.
So in the context of gender being more fluid, do you think that will change the workplace dynamics as well? Like right now we really value those really outspoken people, the loudest voice is the one that's heard, like you've mentioned. Do you think that will change if gender becomes more fluid?
I'm not going to say that it's because of gender fluidity. I think it's from recognizing the strength of differences. And I understand that the topic is gender, but I like to look at gender as one of the many different factors in which we are different, and that diversity brings strength. So the realization that the fastest, loudest is not always the most correct. There's, for example, the book Quiet, being an introvert in a world, I can't remember the subtitle, but the title of the book is Quiet. And so the people who are more introverted, more introspective, less likely to speak up, much more conceptual, theoretical, analytically based, as compared to those who are more outspoken, active, dynamic. In a meeting space, we might hear from those who are more verbally dynamic, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily right. And we need to learn how to give space to those who may not be as orally dynamic, but their logic, their thinking, their conceptual framework is much stronger, and in the end plays out. We've seen so many different, for example, economic crises and downturns because people following the loudest voices, instead of taking the time to do the analysis, to stop, to think and reflect, but the preference was for the more dynamic, active risk as compared to the analytical stepping back and thinking with a long-term perspective.
I see. Sorry to interrupt. We have a question.
Oh,
from the
wonderful.
Audience. Yes. Nikita, could you please?
Yes, so more work, our visual viewer.
All right.
Oh, hi.
Why are gender stereotypes so widespread across different cultures? If it's only due to socialization, if it is not something inherent to the genders, why is this style of socialization to be so common?
Right.
Cool.
My research doesn't go that far. I can't answer that based on data. What I can say from my observations of being an African American female who's lived in Asia, traveled throughout Korea specifically, Seoul, South Korea, traveled throughout Asia, across Europe, from my experience on those 3 continents, plus also visits to Australia as well, and working in an international, multinational setting with multinational corporations. If I can restate the question, if it's not innate, why is it so widespread worldwide? Is that a question? Is that what do I understand the sum and the crux of the question? Okay. I don't have an answer for that. I have a hypothesis, and goodness. I'm going back and I'm thinking socialization, and then what's the basis of socialization? If we take it back and we just think about, for example, dominance, if we go from our modern time and take it back when groups and societies started to form, when we didn't have technology to equal things, in terms of where this came from, in terms of traditional roles. You had people getting married and having children so much earlier. You're talking about 16, 15-year-old. People were having children. If you think of the development of 15, 16-year-olds in terms of strength, in terms of preferences, when these societies were forming and families were being developed, if we go back to hunters and gatherers, it wasn't the women who were out there necessarily trapping the wild animal, but working in that gathering capacity of community, of working together. So I do think there are historical, social, economic reasons, political reasons. If you have the laws in place, it's not so long ago where there were laws that women were not permitted to sign for themselves, to take bank loans and all sorts of things. So I would say that the situation that we have now around the world, if when our societies formed, that there were clear physical advantages, male over female, and it was purely physical based, in that the society and the economy and the finances were based on physical labor as compared to mental labor, then with childbearing, and the preference would be for a more male dominated society, unless there's value given in a more gathering. There are, of course, matriarchal societies, but they are not that widespread. And so I'm only surmising. It's not gospel truth. I'm just trying to deduce to answer this question on the fly.
But to get back what you were saying earlier, I don't think it's necessarily like that there is zero innateness in the gender differences. I do believe that there are some things that are a little bit more natural, especially even in the neuroscience community. We have people talking about prenatal testosterone, saying about how when women are born with, or when women have more testosterone in the womb, they tend to have more male tendencies when they are born, so they'll tend more towards like male toys and a more outspoken personality. And so I don't think that it's necessarily all just nurture, and I think you were mentioning that before, that there is a nature factor in it at the very least, even though even babies can already be influenced by the things that the parents reward and the things that they value. So I think it's an interplay of the two. It's not necessarily that it's just nurture or that it's just nature. It's that both kind of interplay, and that's why it's so widespread.
The thing that I think is that I completely agree with you that there's nature, and that's where I'm talking about that continuum, where men have what's typically feminine traits and women have what's typically considered masculine traits. But how many times in our own societies and those around the world, someone acting outside of those traditional gender roles are encouraged, are supported, are rewarded?
I see.
And I think there was a very interesting interview with a neuroscientist, and I believe her name is Lise Elliott,
Mm-hmm.
and she was a professor at Rosalind Franklin University in Chicago, and she basically states that there are people now who are trying to raise their kids without those gender specifics, but she's actually kind of saying that it's impossible because they're so ingrained at this point that we can't really let go of those stereotypes anymore, and so the children keep growing up with those same roles in them, and it just perpetuates.
But the thing is, and this is the reason why I have the issue with the whole stereotype discussion. So a little girl grabs for a pink skirt. It's what we associate with the pink skirt that makes it an issue.
Mhm.
And going, yes, that's what you should have. Good, good, good.
Yeah.
Or, no, we're trying to give you an open world. That's bad. No, it's just a pink skirt. And it's what we project on it that makes it the whole issue. The child's just going for what it likes,
Mhm.
for what she likes in this example. And so that's my whole issue. Whether there's a for or against in the child, to simply let it blossom and flow according to what's good. Now, the thing is that our corporate setting currently promotes and supports a certain type. And if one isn't that type, then one's less likely to arrive there. And I'm very much in the favor of one should be able to do what one wants according to the best of the ability. So one of the things that I liked that I shared from the training that I did for the Women's Interest Network is the understanding that one's career is a team sport.
Mhm.
And so many times we go at it alone thinking we're going to be a self-made person, but nobody got to that C-suite alone. There is networking, there are people opening doors, there are people mentoring. So talking about understanding that we might see one person, but that person represents a group of people who believed in that person. There's politics involved as well. And someone learning the rules of the game to be able to win at that game.
Right. So, coming to my second question. So, in 2017, Pew Research Center suggested that for every dollar that a man makes, a woman makes only 82 cents. But the problem with this argument is it's a very, very overall average, and that the choices, because of all the factors that we've mentioned, the choices that women automatically make or men automatically make, or if it's innately within them to make those choices, these don't actually show in the overall aggregates. But this is a big argument against the gender divide, the pay gap, basically. What are your opinions on this?
My opinion on it is if people are doing the same amount of work and the same quality of work, they should be paid the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is my opinion on that.
So overall averages don't matter whatsoever?
Once again, if we're talking about men and women across all fields, yes, of course, some fields are paid better than other fields.
Mhm.
So if there are more women in a field that is not paid as well, is it paid less well because there are women in it? Or because that's what society values? And if men are in certain fields that pay better, do they pay better because men are in it? Or because the value? So it's skewed in terms of the value to society. But when we take it like that, and then we say 80 cents or 82 cents on the dollar, I understand. But when we talk about two people doing the same job, same quality, same length of service, and the pay is different, that's gender inequality. That's
I see. Yeah, go on.
Don't you think that there are other conditions that also play into that? Because negotiation comes up quite a lot, because women tend to negotiate their pay less, and I think you've even brought this up. We don't really, or we're not as outspoken as we should be, especially about pay. Do you think factors like that play into it as well?
so you're saying that if someone asks for more, they should get more, even if they're not doing more. What I'm saying is that companies are going to pay the most advantageous amount of money possible for the services received. There is a amount available for that service from two. I do believe that any person, male or female, should negotiate for the greatest amount of money. That is the reality, that you will only get not what you deserve, but what you negotiate.
What you fight for, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the fairness factor is same work, same pay. But if there is a scale, and if there is a range, and one person asks, and the other person doesn't ask, and I'm trying to maintain a budget,
Right.
we're talking about reality. And so that's once again where we say it's a team sport.
Right.
Now, when people are socialized to keep quiet, be good, and you'll eventually get what's yours, or the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and I've learned that time and time again, that if I just push, I'll get what I want, and I can be a pain, but I get what I want, then of course I'm going to negotiate. And I'm going to stand there till you give it to me. But if I've been told all my life, just sit still, be good, you're wonderful, you're going to get what's yours. Because good things come to those who wait. You've got very different messages, which create very different behavior, which has been reinforced over time. Because one group has learned all life that good things did eventually come. And another group learns, as soon as I ask for it and I don't go anywhere, I'm going to get it. Now, who's right? They're both right based on their life experiences.
But not in the workplace.
Well, what happens when it doesn't stop at school and it continues for the rest of their lives?
I see.
And the gap continues.
I see. And
So I think that's the answer to your question. So if both start at the same amount, 20 to 25, both start at 20, one asks for 21 6 months later, one asks for 2,500 1 year later.
yeah.
Just expands.
But you were talking about ranges, right? So any person working at a particular level will have, these are corporates which actually use these techniques. For the same people at the same level, they will only provide these ranges, and whoever can bargain or argue on that will get more, right? And what about corporates who actually don't have these kind of skills? And I think these are most kind of medium to small scale corporates, and they don't have these kind of skills and systems to balance and check these things. And this is, I think, a big contribution factor to the real pay gap. Once you actually put in all the necessary variables, I think there still is a pay gap, and I think this is actually a contributor to the pay gap. And so
I like what you just said, because you brought in another factor. Same quality of work, different location. Smaller company, fewer funds. Larger company, bigger salaries, more resources, more connections. And that can make a big difference as well in creating a pay gap.
Excuse me, we have a question from the audience.
Yay! Hello.
Crypto Lab asks,
Yes.
how about the use of gender stereotypes in marketing, with budgets of millions of dollars and children are being exposed to them? I suppose this person wants a comment, but then there is a follow. Isn't that a
Yes.
huge driving factor behind our gender identities nowadays?
It's coming once again. So coming from my background, I started in journalism, as you stated, and then we go into professional and business communication, where we looked at things like integrated marketing, public relations. When you talk about marketing, the first thing is the target audience. The target audience. First thing after that comes the demographics. We talk about age, we talk about gender, we talk about education, and then psychographics, values, lifestyles, hobbies. I need to talk in the language that my target audience understands, it resonates with them and respects. And when companies get it right, there's a warm, fuzzy feeling, and people feel an affinity, brand affinity. And when they get it wrong and they're tone deaf, people strike back. And they make fun of them. We see it on social media with forums and platforms like Twitter all the time. So when we talk about gender stereotypes, I think one of the things that's very current and relevant is talking about empowerment and talking about authenticity. Those are things that are coming up, and talking about being real. And when companies represent those in ways that reflect those in ways that resonate with modern audiences, they get praise. And when they step afoul of that, they get criticism. So I think they still play with them. I think it's a safe framework. But when that framework is too limited, too dated, people rebel. And when it is more expansive and inclusive, it's seen as more avant-garde or more innovative or more modern in understanding. Of course, there are some people who still ascribe to very traditional gender roles and are very resentful when they're shown something else. But it's about the company's target audience. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I say, okay, they're literally not targeting me. I find this offensive. It doesn't resonate with me. They're obviously trying I'm not their target audience.
Right.
How about you? What are your thoughts?
Well, okay, hold on. What was the question exactly? Because I lost track of it.
Well, I suppose that this individual points out how marketing has billions of dollars to create advertisements that shape our views, and then actually there is a follow-on. Children are targeted and their values are being dictated to them. Examples being Axe commercials with men dominating hundreds of women, and children unintentionally see this image of men.
Well, I think there's also another factor that actually plays into that in order to add to what you were already saying. There was a book that came out a while ago, I think it was talking about pink and blue and how there is a huge discrepancy that stems from that. And how basically it's okay for females or for children who are girls to wear both pink and blue, but it is not acceptable for men or boys to wear anything but like blue or darker colors and stuff like that. And the way that this book had explained it is that basically what this instilled in the end is that because girls are allowed to wear both, it's kind of like it makes being a boy kind of like the aspiration, like you want to be like, it's okay to be more like a boy rather than for boys being okay for them to be more like a girl. So those carrying things and stuff like that you were talking about, how they feel restrained, I think that even also plays into the marketing, that's not just a separation between the two, but it also even values one or the other. And I understand the entire thing about target audiences, but I honestly, when it comes to children and toys like that, I also understand that if you market towards a specific audience, you essentially end up getting more money in the end because that specific target audience is more likely to buy the product in the end, if I'm not mistaken.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
That's the goal for spending all that money. Yeah.
And I understand all of that, but it really plays in so much into the way that we think about things and the way that we reward certain things or the way we value what being a girl or being a boy is like.
Yeah, and I thank you for asking for clarification, because now there was more of that question read in this case. So, for example, the children aspect came out a little bit better when the question was read for you, and then also the acts, men's, right. Of course, I had in my mind things like Dove Real Beauty, the current issues with, for example, H&M and their marketing and the material and how they're depicting people of color. And so it wasn't even playing in my mind the impact for children, and then, of course, for men. When we talk about children, once again, the brain isn't even fully formed until around age 25, 26. Right. And so you're looking at very vulnerable minds who haven't a clue about the manipulation that exists with marketing and advertising. So, of course, they're vulnerable. Of course, they would be a target. And so this is where the role of parents and educations come in. Is it the role of companies to be responsible? Of course it is, because as they are responsible, they'll resonate with parents who are looking for partners in raising their children in broader gender roles. For example, there was a limited edition Barbie that was done according to different female heroes. Of course, there was March 18th, Women's International Women's Day, and March 8th, International Women's Day. And so there was this commemorative collection of these Barbies who were female trailblazers and achievers, but they're not for sale. It was just a very nice thing, but that's what we need for sale, available. We need science kits that have little girls. We have, and I love that you brought this out, that the blue and the pink is fine for girls, because who doesn't want to be a powerful, associate with those things, associate with those indicators of power. But if women don't have as much power in society and don't have as much respect, why would you want to take on some of the trappings like pink that are associated? What are you, a girl? Is there a greater thing to denigrate a male with? What are you, some kind of girl? And so that's, again, what we're talking about. We're talking about opening the gender roles so that being neither male nor female is a praise or criticism.
But,
it just is. You have black hair. Yeah, that's as far as it goes.
So what I wanted to say is, you brought up the corporates should take up a responsibility, maybe. But the problem that we're facing in modern democracy, especially the US, is the democracy itself is controlled by corporates, by lobbyists, and all the money that is induced into the government by these corporates. So don't you think they will try to take more advantage of these situations than try to balance it out somehow? Because there is an imbalance, and they see it, and that's what they're trying to exploit. And they also control the government in terms of funding them by lobbying into them. And I don't see how government will balance it out by making laws against these corporates when that's how it functions, if you see what I mean.
And you're talking about laws against what specifically?
Not laws against anything. I'm saying that these gender roles that exist in society, this is what, for example, the Axe commercial, that's what they're trying to take advantage of, that boys are considered a particular way and girls are considered a particular way. And corporates in general, I think, have this tendency to take advantage of this. If a government, if corporate lobbying exists so much, and the corporate is indirectly controlling the government, I don't see how government would make regulations to stop this process happening.
Yeah. Get in their circles and they say boycotts. Look at all the fallout from when people have misbehaved on social media. People have gotten fired. People who used to represent brands, their endorsers have stepped away from them. So it's not about government interaction or about institutional governmental interference. It's about connecting with the values that drive people. That's what marketing is. So if it can work for corporations, why can't it work for people? Now, if I know corporations want to make money and I take my money to a place that affirms me and values me, then they'll start to listen.
I see.
But as long as their bottom line is not touched, then where is the motivation?
I see.
So we as the consumers technically have the power to change it towards the top then.
Once again, empowerment. But you can only act on power if you know you have power. If you believe you're powerless, once again, both can go in and negotiate, but only one has been trained to expect a positive result.
Right.
I think, we have another question, which is
Yeah.
There are two.
Yes. Got to fit those in.
First comes from Brave Banana.
Ah.
And Brave Banana asks, how do you interpret this statement? Women have changed what it means to be a woman and embrace a much larger human canvas. Men are still painting on half of the canvas. The last one is question mark.
That definitely goes back to what I was talking about in terms of embracing and not going, oh, men have had it so good, it's time for women's time. That's not the answer in any way, shape, or form. And so I have read and observed in my own research how there is a backlash because as there have been expanding roles and opportunities for women because of education, economical, financial, and social and political clout, that men and their traditional roles, potentially because of gender stereotypes that say men have it well, it's a wonderful thing to be a man, and they're encroaching on our space. What space do we have left? But as that gender role does not embrace all the things that a man can be that may be ascribed to be more feminine in aspect, the space gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's the reason why it's about diversity and inclusion. As women's roles grow, so can men's roles grow. What about paternity leave? What about a man being able to stay home and be a house husband because that's where he feels fulfilled and he comes alive, and those things traditionally ascribed to the feminine sphere, where he will not be denigrated by other men, well, he will not be made fun of women, but he is in his element and he can embrace that with all of his being because that's what he is good at. Where is the celebration for that? And that's the discussion we need to have.
On that note, I think Miss Juwana Jenkins is time. She doesn't have much time left with us, and so she will be leaving us soon. And instead, Virat will be joining us. He's a member of Mind Matter, the podcast team, and he will also be discussing similar issues along these lines.
Lovely. Thank you so very much for inviting me. Thank you for all the questions and for the stimulating discussion. Thank you for having meaningful discussion that makes us think about things that matter.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to having more discussions with you.
That would be lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Online and hearing what are some possibilities to move forward in the next generation to be more inclusive of everyone, regardless of gender.
We'll try to include that in.
Yeah.
Virat.
All right, we're back.
It seems more chilled out now.
Yeah. So,
Alright.
all right, everyone. So, hey, I'm Virat. For those who don't know me already,
What's on a man's mind, huh?
always.
So, Virat, you saw what we were talking about. You were here in this room while we were talking about. Is there any things that you disagree with, like, essentially?
Well, actually, I agreed with a lot more than I expected, and she brought out a lot of good points, and I think her intentions are all good. I just think like there's just an assumption which I think is very common today, but this is a bit of like more in the bigger concept, is that people today assume that human beings exist downstream of culture, while I think that culture exists downstream of human beings. And that human beings exist in a certain way, and then cultures form around the combination of that and environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's just a projection of what these human beings already are. While a lot of the modern assumption is that socialization, or exactly, culture through socialization forms the human.
But the whole point that we were talking about is that, I mean, before a certain age, there was
Mhm.
no particular direction that this socialization was going towards. And now, since education exists and like science exists, maybe we should create a direction for such kind of evolution of our culture and
So you mean a controlled eugenic-style society?
No, that's not what I mean.
I mean, you marry her, he marries her, you know, we optimize that stuff, we
No, that's not what I mean.
get everything
We know
working
that
just right.
I'm talking about that. From science, we understand
Yeah.
that certain things that we're doing are
Mhm.
wrong. For example, gender stereotypes and things like this. Thank you so much, Alex. Gender.
Well, what's a stereotype?
Could you do you want to explain that?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean,
What is a stereotype?
it's baseline assumption you make about a group of people.
How do stereotypes form?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I could say some of them form from like the experiences that you have. So if you have multiple experiences that lean towards one direction, then you are likely to think that all people that you meet are like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of different experiences. Could also just be one, and then you would automatically assume that all of them are likely going to be like that. Or it could come through socialization. So if you hear people talking about, oh, these people are like this, or even the marketing, it can come from the outside.
No, I understand that, but like, how do these ideas form? I mean, how do the stereotype itself forms?
It's observation. It's like personal observation more than anything else, and then group observation along with personal
So
observation.
it's a combination of different personal observations.
And then resulting in groups talking about it, and
Mhm.
then like them having a collective observation about it.
Yeah.
So,
No, but like, for example, stereotypes are often inaccurate, but for very good reasons. So that because they're true, but very surface level wise.
mhm.
Like, for example, like the stereotype we all have of French people, you know, like the striped shirt, the blue and the white stripes, the beret, the baguette, you know, riding on the bicycle. Thing is that the beret with the blue and white stripes is a navy uniform of the 19th century.
Mhm.
And so, what type of Frenchmen would you see around London? A lot.
Mhm.
Frenchmen
I
with
see.
striped shirts.
I see.
So it's, you know, and so, you know, the stereotype all Frenchmen wear that, well, you know, that's preposterous.
Mhm.
But there's a good root for, you know, why the stereotype takes this shape.
Well, I wouldn't consider it good, but I mean, it is a route.
It's a very narrow view of what the global, like what's happening on a global perspective.
Mhm.
So it's like overgeneralization, a hasty generalization.
Yes.
So
But in what context are we generalizing?
we are specifically talking about gender here. So
No, that's not what I mean. I mean, in what situational context are you generalizing? Because you say we're generalizing, so it's like, okay, fine, we generalize too much, you know, men do this and women do this. But in which, in what type of situations?
that's the whole problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
but
take
let's get
context
back
away.
to gender. Let's
Alright.
just take the conversation back to gender so
Mhm.
that we are staying on topic.
Mhm.
So you were talking about stereotypes. I mean, there are lots of different stereotypes that exist today, especially when it comes to the gender fluidity, right? That like gender is now becoming a lot more fluid. So I think there's even more stereotypes coming in. Like
How can
trans-
gender become
about
more fluid? Like, what's changed so much about human beings?
Well, I think that necessarily. So
Like, either it was never fluid or it always was fluid. And like, we've just discovered the fluidity now. So it's like, you know, it's not
That's
like...
an interesting point.
it is an interesting point. You surprised me there, but yeah.
But I think that's just the way you put it. I think what she actually meant is
Mhm.
that through science, whoever's discovering this and making these findings,
Mhm.
they're finding that this has always existed apparently, and I don't know about this.
But how exactly does this work? So,
Well, you kind of okay. So
because for example, like there's things like the sexuality spectrum, sort of like the Kinsey scale and that sort of stuff,
yeah.
which I understand, but the gender fluidity stuff I do not understand.
So so gender is
So how does
usually
that
defined.
spectrum work?
Gender is usually defined as a social construct, whereas sex is usually defined as the biological construct.
So gender is the performative behavior.
Basically, yes. And on that, it makes a lot more sense, right? So if you think of traits that are typically female and traits that are typically male, there's people who have both in a way, right?
But like, I mean, what's a male trait? What's a female trait? It's like they're just traits you find more in one sex than the other.
Basically, yes. It's where the stereotypes
I just have a question here.
Yeah.
See, I think in language consensus, most people would consider gender as a binary. I don't know how many people consider it as non-binary and how many people consider it as binary, but a lot of people on a consensus basis, they consider gender as binary. And so don't you think it would be a better idea to find a better term for this and like define it in a better term?
Define
I don't know.
men and women differently?
No, just the behaviors that they exhibit in a different term, because that's what you're trying to do, right?
Partially, yes, but
You see what I'm trying to say, though.
yeah, I do understand your point, but I don't have an answer.
Maybe like another point that Professor Jenkins made, which I find was interesting, is the point that diversity is strength. And I don't disagree, but I can't agree either. It's sort of this. It's not only a strength. It's a two-sided coin. Like most things in reality, everything is a two-sided coin, and it comes with strengths and with weaknesses, with its polar opposite. So I mean, like discussing the strengths of diversity, which is the ability as a group, it makes you much stronger as a group, but it can limit your group cohesion. So it's really a trade-off.
But she mentioned that. She said that yes, the teams will work better together if they're monotonous, I guess, and they will work not as good if the group is more diverse, but it is much better in the long run because they'll have more success.
I think you were talking about heterogeneous.
Yeah, but that's different. I was saying if they're monotonous, they'll work better together.
They'll have more success in that they'll be more successful in their endeavors?
Well, not necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily what she was saying, but she was saying that they work better, or it's
Do they
easier
perform
to work.
better?
Yes, I think that is what she was saying, ultimately.
Okay.
I'd have to go back
What
to
does ultimately mean? Like, if they perform better, then that's good, but I mean, like, what does ultimately mean?
As in, like, the end result is going to be is going to be better. But if you're looking immediately, as in how quick they make decisions and stuff like that,
No, but I'm thinking like let's think like concrete. Like let's take an example. You have a group project to do, and you'll have a very heterogeneous group and a very homogeneous group. Is the heterogeneous group or the homogeneous group going to perform better? Heterogeneous group. Okay.
Why do you think that is?
Because there's more opinions, more diverse opinions. So we all grow
So there's
up.
more ground covered.
Would you stop interrupting me?
Sorry.
But yeah, sure. It is more ground covered. I guess that is one way to put it. Because you grow up differently, you grow up in different places. That means you have different opinions on things, different ways of thinking, and you bring all of that together in one place, and you have like 50 perspectives basically at your disposal, and therefore you cover more ground, like you said.
It's confusing me a little bit, actually. I think homogeneous groups are mixed groups, and heterogeneous groups are divided groups.
Homogeneous is...
It's where you get homosexuality from. Same sexuality.
I see.
Remember it like that.
And okay, there were other things that we want to talk about. So, equality of opportunity is something that our society has always strived to, make sure everybody has at the same time. And a lot of people today, they look at statistics and they bend it and they say, look at this, the final result says that the statistics are so different and like it's so to one side that they want to control those statistics, and they actually what they want from this is equality of outcomes. You see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I see absolutely what you're trying to get at.
And what do you think about this? Is equality of outcomes something that we should aim to achieve in the society?
Well, the thing is, like, how to say, a system where we all have equal outcomes is the most unfair system of all.
And you can't actually make it. You can't actually make that happen.
You can, through
because people
absolute tyranny. through complete and utter tyranny, then you can do it.
I mean, in today's democracies.
Like North Koreans are all equal, except if you're part of the party, then you're more equal than others. But no, but it's you see, the equal outcome stuff is really, it's dangerous, and that's the problem, is that there's a big confusion. That's why I was actually very happy to hear what I heard from Professor Jenkins, because she was saying, equality of the outcome is stupid, because people are different, and what we have to do is encourage as many different sort of different people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now the thing is, the sort of the problem I have with the sort of like diversity emphasis of the approach, it's that if there is a lack of diversity, it's immediately supposed to be like, oh, it is something wrong. It's like there's the assumption that something went wrong. That if there is a lack of diversity in a field or in a team or in a company, or if something like this, like, oh, they fucked up somehow.
Yeah,
and that's like really the big issue I have. Is like, it's not that I don't think we should discourage diversity, but I think that if there's a lack of, like, how to say, localized lack of diversity, I don't think it's a problem, because sometimes circumstance is circumstance. So that's where I really see the problem in the push. Like, for example, in the EU, I think from next year, we will all managerial positions will have to be 50% male and 50% female. Sometimes there just aren't that many candidates. So I mean, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to hire every single female that presents herself, and then still be scratching for more, because just not many are showing up? Like, how do you do this?
So this is actually EU law. It's going to happen
soon. It's like, basically, if companies don't conform to this standard, is it 2019, 2020, they'll have to pay a fine. Like, of course, you can still keep it, but you'll have to start paying a fine.
Whoa. Speaking of which,
and right now the rate is like, well, as of last year, it was about there was 6% women in managerial positions.
94% men, huh?
So that's why it's scary, because
it's tremendous change that they're aiming for.
Well, change has to come quickly, and there's no time to waste for equality, and it's 2018 and all this stuff.
I don't know about that.
No, but that's what I'm saying, is that it's very easy to just say it's 2018, it's about time, and not really think about like, well, what you've actually just done. You said, oh, like, this will guarantee that women will get in. It's like, no, you're just going to penalize people for not forcing women into it.
Corporations.
Yeah.
And besides, I think the competition in the general market will go down, because it's going to be a two-side competition, not just a one-side competition, right? In the sense, men are going to be competitive in their own thing, and women are going to be competitive in their own. But
that's an exclusive.
Is it? But tell me more about it.
At least partially, I believe that it is a good thing. Just because, I mean, what we've discussed so far is that basically males and females are socialized to have certain characteristics, because those are the ones that are rewarded. Like she was saying earlier, that if you're quiet as a girl, then that usually ends up being what you get rewarded for. So that means...
Is that true?
Yes, it's very true. It's very true.
Like I've never seen it. Like, I don't know. Like, maybe as a guy, but like I've never seen it.
I can tell you from my own past.
Yeah, if you can give an example of how this happens, so that the audience also will understand what exactly we're trying to get at.
Because it feels kind of vague. It's like, oh, women are taught to sit down and be quiet, and boys are taught to be energetic. I mean, what the hell does that mean?
I mean, they're not taught to be energetic. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. But at least speaking from my own experience, there's a lot of like, just stay quiet, talk softer, and make sure that you're not as like running around too much, and you're supposed to be a girl, you're supposed to do this and that, and you're supposed to be proper, and like...
Well, at least that girls are told to be quiet, boys are put on medication.
I'm not saying that ADHD? One situation is better than the other.
I thought he was...
the horrible misdiagnosing of
ADHD, especially in the US,
epidemic that they have now. No, because, like, that's what I'm saying. At least girls are told to be quiet. Boys are just drugged into being quiet.
I'm not saying one is better than the other, or that one is greater than the other. But when it comes to workplace, that there are things that the workplace tends to value a little bit more than some other traits. So, like in leadership positions, like we were talking about earlier, you are more outspoken. You have more of those assertive qualities. You're going to get further because you expect, that you will get results by being assertive rather than by being not as assertive and a little bit more reserved, I suppose.
But then, for example, let's look at like another environment that everybody goes through. Like, for example, let's say men dominate in the workplace because assertiveness is encouraged. I'm not saying that. That's not even saying that. It's certain specific fields that encourage this assertiveness, because like if you take all of work, it doesn't even apply. But like for example, let's take an environment that all men go through, which is the total opposite, which is primary school, which is probably like extremely female dominated, and it encourages what we'd call female traits. Be quiet, sit down, don't be assertive, play nice, don't compete, teamwork.
What kind of data do you have to support this? Like what kind of data do you have to support this? Because
no, I don't know.
You're trying to say that what context are you coming from? In the sense, is it Western society that you're talking about?
Yes, I'm talking that the majority of elementary school teachers are women. It's a very female-dominated environment. If the argument that a male-dominated environment creates perpetuates this male dominance even more by sort of eliminating women or not allowing women into the system.
I don't think
I would say
argument
that there is another place where females are extremely dominating that every human being has to go through, and it's the most formative period in your life. So I mean, if you want to talk about these sort of, if it's a power balance or something like this.
But what we were getting at before is that whether or not it is better that maybe the two competitions are separate, so that there is one competitive field basically for women and one competitive field for men,
but
so
why?
That you have those 50-50%. See, the thing is that I said partially it might actually be better due to the fact that women simply tend to have different traits, and they value different things, and they expect different things, and...
But wouldn't it be better to select those people based on those traits rather than based on their gender?
Yes, but is it those traits that you need in those particular jobs? Let's say, in order to be a manager, do you necessarily have to have those types of traits and stuff like that? And if that is the case, then don't you think that even in the women, let's say, department, right, in the women section, right, that the women that are more assertive would beat out those that are less assertive. So it would technically result in the same outcome, just more women that are able to compete with men.
Well, they're not competing with men because you're excluding them from competing with men.
But what I'm saying
is
that they are
opposite of competing
but
with
they are
men.
better able to keep up with that with the situation, because they'll have more opportunity to be up at that top position, because they won't necessarily have to compete against people directly who are already 5 times better at
I don't think like the women who will climb to the top don't need help. I mean, they don't need to have the competition excluded, and those who will be at the bottom, they probably should be there.
Can I ask you something? Sorry to interrupt. You said 5 times better already.
Yeah.
Why would a corporate choose somebody who's 5 times worse at a job in any circumstances? Why would any manager who's in any position to say, I want somebody who's 5 times better, why would they turn that down? And why would they say that she's a woman, so she's probably 5 times worse than the best male person that we can get?
Number one, it's diversity, and the second thing that I would tell you is because it's just the trait that they are that much better at. I'm not saying that their work or their outcome is necessarily that much worse.
But wouldn't it be better, for example, if you're looking for assertive people, just select for assertiveness, and you'll have a combination, doesn't matter really which proportion, of men and women who will all be assertive. And what percentage is of which is irrelevant, because you'll be selecting for the trait. And the thing is, averages are averages, and averages work on large populations. They don't work on the individual level. So it's like, so if one group, for example, on average has very low IQ, that doesn't preclude it from containing the smartest person on earth, because it's just an average, and vice versa. And so there's this thing is like, women do this and men do this. It's like, no, men tend to do this, women tend to do this. There's overlap, there's combination. We're still the same species. We still have many things in common.
That's why there's a more gender fluid concept rising.
Well, that's the thing I don't understand, because for example, you have men with I don't understand this whole these traits masculine, these traits feminine, this man, this woman. If a man acts like this, he's a woman. If a woman acts like this, she's a man. I don't, it's like, if you're,
So you essentially already believe in gender fluidity then?
No, I don't. I believe quite the opposite. I believe, you're a man or you're a woman, and you own it no matter what you do. Nothing can take that away from you. It's such a core part of who you are,
but
that nothing you do can take it away from you.
But a lot of our society attributes traits to either male or female, and that's what we were talking about. Should gender become something that like annotates or denotates attributes of the person, or should it be something?
Well, it's not true because it's a pattern. It's an average. Do you see what I mean?
Can you expand on that?
I mean that, for example, that if I come to this table and say, oh, Naveen's a man, therefore I'll make these assumptions. These assumptions, although they can, sometimes they can be a shortcut. The odds are on my side that they're accurate. There are chances that they are inaccurate, and so it doesn't really help me that much. It can maybe help me a little bit, if I need to make a quick decision, but it doesn't really help me to know you better. The only way I can know you better is by knowing you better. And then I can say, okay, Naveen is like this, and he does this and this. Is it stereotypically male or not? Who cares? And so, I mean, it only applies if you're going to like manage large populations. And I mean, this applies, to either super large corporations or governments. And you don't want them to be managing or legislating based on gender anyway. So, I mean, it's not like it's really relevant. It's just like, oh, this is interesting trivia. And also, one reason why I think it's important to like highlight, like if there are differences, that we should research them and highlight them, because if we assume that everybody's equal and everybody's just as competent and everybody's the same and everybody have all the same traits and there's the same distribution of traits in the population, no matter what you do, and then you look at the work distribution and the success distribution and you see a disparity, the assumption is it must be discrimination. But if there is a difference in the different populations, you need to know so that you're not assuming discrimination where there is none.
Mm-hmm. Right. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
we have a question that's coming from the audience. Nikita, could you help us with that?
Yes, the question comes from Gamer, and the question
Genetic
is,
name.
can the girl please finish her point about how women are encouraged to be quiet without interruptions, please?
Yes, please.
Well, I mean, I was talking about my personal experience, right? Well, I don't remember the point I was making. But if you're asking me for personal experience as to how I personally experienced, getting told to be quiet and to make sure that you're proper and stuff like that. I mean, it even comes down to the clothes. Like, if you put any child in a dress, there is no way that you can do anything besides actually stand or sit or do anything beyond that. It just won't work. Just because you'll end up showing everything, and your mom is going to be like, "Oh no, you can't do that," obviously, because it'll be indecent and stuff like that. So even from the clothes that you put them in, they are forced to be proper and basically quiet and make sure that they sit down and they aren't too rowdy. So it starts from a pretty early age, and even I have had this experience plenty of times where essentially as a kid there was a lot of times when I wanted to say something and a lot of people started talking over me or for me because they kind of just assumed that I wouldn't talk because that's the way I'm expected to behave.
Are you talking about your parents? Because that's something all parents do, to talk for their
No,
kids
I'm not.
and talk over their kids.
No, I am
that's
not.
something all parents do. So.
No, I am not. That includes doctors and stuff like that, by the way, that when they ask me, how are you feeling or whatever, and I just nodded and they were like, oh, okay, so you're doing fine and blah, 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 and they'd go about whatever they were doing.
Friedi, to be honest, I think it's like you found something that you've been looking for, in a way. Like, I'm not this happens to everybody. But for example, I interrupted you once and you immediately said, don't interrupt me. I think it's because you have this idea that, guys will always interrupt me, and they always do interrupt me.
I'm not saying
when it's not
just,
really that much the case.
I'm not saying it's just guys. It is both men and women. It was adults in general that just assumed that I would stay quiet.
Maybe because you were a kid.
Why
do you think it's because of your gender?
Listen, I doubt that it is. Look, when people ask you a question, technically they expect that you respond, correct?
Yes.
And they never expected me to respond. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I had cousins and stuff like that who were male, and they were expected to answer. They were expected to be assertive. If you're asking me to think of a very specific example,
if I can give you situations with my parents. They ask me a question, I answer them, and then they ignore my answer and do whatever they were thinking about.
That's different. They let you answer.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Yes,
they're not even waiting
yes,
for it.
Does.
Right.
It does.
I think we're deviating a little bit from.
No, I understand that, we are deviating, but I mean, if we want to talk about sometimes people are not bad to me, sometimes they're rude to me. I mean, this happens to everybody.
And
to think that's always to think that's because of your gender, I don't think so.
And is it strangers?
Maybe it's because you're short.
Is it?
Maybe it's because.
So I was short as a kid, and you all could already see that as a kid I was short.
No, I don't know. Maybe it's because you're not you don't if somebody like speaks,
let's
you
not
stop speaking.
hypothesize like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
come to our next
Okay,
point.
yeah, let's not.
Let's come to our next point that we have to. Do you think we know that a significant part of a woman's life, at least some women's life, is filled with pregnancy and like caring for children and things like this. Do you think this is a hurdle that women have to sort of cross to get on the equals like side that men are in the corporate field? What do you think about this, really?
I don't think it's necessarily a hurdle to cross, and I do understand that there are a lot of companies who are basically afraid that you go into maternity leave and basically all lose the money. But, and
I'm sorry, how do you mean? Are you talking about the loopholes?
yeah,
Would you mind expanding on that, if you don't mind?
you can explain it.
Sure. So I think what she's referring to is in Western countries where maternity leave is paid, maternity leave is given. There are loopholes where women, sort of, at least some very, very, very small minority of women, tend to take advantage of this system where they can't get fired during these 2-year period, and after 2 years they just tend to have another kid and probably another kid and another kid. And so what happens is, when it comes to a medium and small scale company, the problem is, will they be able to sustain themselves, because they are a very small, thin margin profit company, and will they be able to sustain themselves if they just keep giving the salary for this person? And so in this terms, the scales are slowly shifting towards hiring more men when it comes to medium and small scale companies. What do you think about this?
Well, the thing is that I actually personally know someone who's had a job for 9 years but has been in the office only for 3 weeks, because she got hired, she went to the office for 3 weeks,
and
she got pregnant.
Where was this?
This is in Prague.
Right.
In the Czech Republic, and she's on her 3rd kid right now.
Right.
So she's basically been like chaining the maternity leaves, and because it happens for it's for a number of years, and they have to keep the position for you. So the position is still there, and she's still hired, and she's still being paid not her entire salary, I believe, but most of it. So, like, it's not something so like I don't know how frequent it is, but the thing is that it's like men and women, nobody's like pure and good, and if there's an opportunity, people will take it, and people will take advantage of it always. So it's a problem that there is a loophole. It's not that we help them or not. Well, of course, every time a government does something, because they're not very smart, there's always a loophole. So I guess that's something. But
so were you on train of thought before I got into the loophole?
Well, see, the thing is, I understand all of that like companies, it might be more advantageous to hire men for the maternity leave reason. But, I mean, that also ends up discriminating against those women who don't want kids. And I know that there's plenty of women, as of right now, that I know that don't want kids. And it's a huge disadvantage to them, or a huge disservice to them, even to kind of assume that.
Like, should you be able to add it into a contract? Like, I promise not to have children as a clause.
You can't do that.
No, but that's what I'm saying. The company has no guarantee. Like if a woman is sure that she doesn't want kids, why can't she add it in there? You know what I'm saying? That could be
because it can change, Virat. Because people change their decisions based on how their experiences in life.
Yeah, but that can change for any other clause. That can change for any clause. My clause says I have to work mornings. Well, now in 2 years I hate mornings. You know what? Fuck it. I don't want to work mornings anymore.
Could you restrain your language?
I'm sorry.
Please.
But in the sense of like, if women want that edge, if the women who are sure that they're not going to have kids and they want to focus on their career, if they want that edge, we should be able to add that in, because the company, they don't know. So I mean, you can't force them into doing it unless you want to. If you want to force them, then be free to force them. I don't think it's very nice to force people to do things, but. I mean, I think that could be an option, give women more flexibility in how much they can negotiate, instead of saying, everybody needs at least this, at least this, at least this. Maybe you could negotiate a maternity leave. You could say, listen, I don't plan on getting pregnant, so I don't need that. I don't need that, and maybe I can get hired before the woman who does want the maternity leave.
What are your thoughts on that, Friede?
And then again, you're going to be disadvantaged. Like the people who actually do want kids are going to be disadvantaged because they are counting on that maternity leave money and stuff like that.
But it's a choice. I mean, having a kid is a choice.
I understand that it's a choice.
You can't do both.
But it's not a one-time choice, That choice can change, and it's a very integral part of your life. It's not like some corporate decision that you make. It's a very, very important choice that you make in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
So
It's a very important decision, but I mean, nobody else can take it but you.
another thing is
Yeah.
that these choices, this particular choice in specific,
Mm-hmm.
is very, very important for governments because of how demographics work. Because the more children have, for example, countries like in Europe where the birth rate is exceptionally low.
Yeah,
compared
well,
to
people
that's right.
overhype this demographic fall stuff because the thing is, like, with increased productivity, we can cover all this, like a shrinking pop. We don't need to be constantly growing.
No, but
in
the problem with
population.
the problem with the problem with the shrinking population is that the average age tends to go higher.
So
That's bad
why?
because the productivity goes low when your brain starts to go into the 70s and the 80s. Are you
okay, but
disagreeing with that?
like European populations are not in their 70s and 80s.
I'm not.
I'm just going to interrupt you for a minute
Yes,
because
They
there's
have
a
like, they're
question.
like
We have
average
questions.
30s or 40s or whatever. So.
Alright, sure,
And
Nikita.
it's not a question, it is just a point. Many people don't choose to have kids, it just happens
Mhm.
often. And it's not a subject of planning.
I see. It's a very valid point, I think.
Well, I think if
What
you have
about
access,
that, Virat?
if you have access to the technology to plan that out, then I mean it's your fault.
No,
I'm sorry.
then there's ethics involved in that. If they choose that once they're conceived, they don't want to rid themselves of the fetus.
No, that's not what I mean. I'm
Then
talking about
then there's
contraception.
ethics.
I'm not talking about abortion.
No, but
I'm talking about contraception.
contraception's not 100%.
I'm talking before the. I'm
It's
talking
not- it's
even
not
before
100%.
I thought you didn't want to force anybody into anything.
No, that's what I'm saying.
That includes contraception. Just saying.
No, well, yeah, but I'm saying if you don't use contraception, then you'll get a baby. I mean, that's reality. So it's like if you don't want to use it, you get the baby. If you don't want the baby, you have to use contraception.
Listen. Again, you are going to force people to use contraception.
No, I'm not going to. I'm not going to force anybody.
Listen to me.
Yeah.
Listen to me for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you do not want to take contraception, because a lot of women don't, because it's a huge hassle.
I'm saying use a condom.
Listen to me.
Yes.
Listen to me. Because people do also get raped, and not every woman wants to get rid of the child once they have it.
Okay.
And if you don't take contraception and you get raped and you get pregnant from that,
Yeah.
then your company is supposed to tell you, well, now look, the contract is broken, you don't work here anymore, and you're on your own.
I'm not saying that it should be systematic. She should have the option to do that if she wants to risk
Virat,
it.
what we're trying to get at, Virat, is that this can't
No,
be...
because what you're
You
saying.
should listen, you should listen.
No.
You should listen.
I always listen, but listen. You listen. No, because what I'm saying is I'm saying that women who want to be more competitive should have the option not to care about those things. If they say, listen, those women things are not something that interests me, they should have the ability to promise to the employer that it doesn't interest them. If it interests them, then they should say, okay, you know what, listen, I'm not willing to give that up, and I'm not going to add that. It's a choice. Like women add this or not.
It's not a matter of interest, and I'm telling you, sometimes women do not have a choice, like was brought up. And in that situation, they need the support of the company. They need it.
They need governmental regulations to like support them, is what we're trying to get at. And you said you were listening. You see what I'm trying to say?
No, but I don't understand
Yes,
the point
Nikita,
you're trying
do
to
we
get.
have a question?
Yes, do you have a question?
All right, sure, go for it.
Well, I also want to point out that government needs these women too, because they are the only ones who can produce the next generation of taxpayers. The only thing that will keep it rolling.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, like why? I'm not an ant. You know, like I'll live my life. I'll have a good life. Everybody should, live their life for themselves, not for the government. And then if the government tries to, change your mind or make you think something else, we'll tell them, hey, I'm not an idiot.
But you can turn that around and say that basically the money that you're giving up for maternity leave, you also end up getting back due to the fact that, a kid is born.
Yeah, but this is a choice of individuals. This is not like government policy. Like these are not government-sponsored children. Like we're not in a breeding program here. These are individuals choosing to have children with other children. Well, not with other children, with other people.
Wow.
Got that? Yeah. These are like individuals who are saying, okay, sometimes not, sometimes it happens by accident, but these are two individuals who have children together. This is not a breeding program. We're not breeding the new army.
I understand you, I understand.
Exactly. Like.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Are you joining?
Yes.
All right. But we have a few other points that we need to make.
But children are a choice, and I think they're a great choice. I love babies. Like I love being around children. Like I would love to be a house husband personally.
Right.
But yeah, like that's my dream. She goes to work and I go take care of the multiple children and sit around the day with the people I love the most in the world. that doesn't sound too bad. But
Right. Let's get to our next point.
yeah.
So, I think this is something that we, in the information age, when experience gets outdated so easily, this break that some women take for maternity,
Mhm.
it really puts them behind on how they are in par with the markets and what their job demands. And so, do you think, Fridi,
Mhm.
that this is a contributing factor for women to have lesser opportunity in companies?
Okay, you're gonna have to repeat that.
Right. So, in the information age,
Yes.
where everything is constantly evolving
Yeah.
and experience gets outdated so fast.
So what you're saying is that they're going to be left behind.
Yes, especially however short that period is for maternity, they're going to be left behind, and the technology and whatever engulfs the corporation is going to go so much farther, and so this gives them a clear disadvantage.
I
Whoever
mean-
wants to choose to have children.
I mean, the beauty of going further and stuff like that is that normally those steps take time, and if those that type of innovation, which you're talking about, basically happens, it usually happens over a longer period of time. That longer period of time can usually be summarized, which means that anybody who is gone for a while and then comes back can usually be updated. So I'm not saying that is going to be a huge issue.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I'm sure that could also be solved if they just decided to, I don't know, use an extra hour from work, not necessarily paid, but, use an extra hour to just catch up.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I think we were discussing earlier about how men and women's brains work differently.
Right.
And probably this is a hasty generalization made by whoever made the study. But don't you think these kind of differences affect how
Go on.
these kind of differences affect
Recuse yourself.
Yes, these kinds of differences.
affect how these roles basically play out in the corporate field?
I think it's like I said before, that there is a part of it is definitely nurture and a part of it definitely is nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the nature part isn't as small as people say it is. Like I was mentioning before, that there's a prenatal testosterone, the way that they act after that is actually different. And I think that even the brain itself has different mechanisms, like it works differently. I don't remember exactly who it was, but somebody said that a woman's brain works from side to side and a man's brain works from front to back.
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Can you give the audience a little bit of a feedback?
I know that there are a huge amount of more specifics around that.
Like, how would that even work? Like,
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to ask her to explain that.
So you have different types of matter in your brain, and
Yeah.
the way that that you make connections
Mhm.
is different between a man and a woman. And I know that it's a lot more complex, but I can't remember for the life of me right now.
But is it like the actual connections are different, or the chronology of like in which order they are activated is different?
That goes into specifically, like I said, I can't remember the specifics.
Let's not hypothesize.
No, I'm not
things.
hypothesizing.
I
It's
think
like
that's where you
people like you have internet. Like, go look it up.
Yeah, sure.
Go look it up.
Sure.
But yeah, they do work differently. Even though, like, the things that you would stereotypically think that would be different, like the amygdala should technically be larger for a woman, right? Because you think that they are more emotional and they tend to be more in tune with emotional things. And the hippocampus, you would expect it to be larger in men due to the fact that you would expect them to be a little bit more logical, is actually not true. Because if you factor in how much bigger a male brain is than a female brain, then they're actually around the same size. So there are some certain biological differences that really do work differently, and then there are certain ones that you would expect to be different, but they're not.
Sorry, what was the first one you said?
The amygdala?
Yes, it was my understanding that the bigger the amygdala, the more emotional control you have.
It's also, I think, a contributing factor. It's like
Where does this come from?
I can't.
No, because I remember reading a study on like the differences in amygdala sizes between right-wingers and left-wingers.
Whoa, interesting.
Yeah, this is like, we might do a podcast on this in the future.
But
But,
quite interesting. If the audience is interested,
Yeah.
But
you can give comments in the comment section.
So it basically found a smaller amygdala in left-wingers, and a larger amygdala in right-wingers.
Uh-huh.
So it meant more emotional control on the side of left-wingers. But they found like higher empathy in left-wingers, and like different traits and different criteria. For example, it was a long study, but there were 4 traits they were checking for, and for example, the conservatives were medium in all the traits, while the American liberals, or what they used the word liberal for, so left-wingers, had very high openness, but were very low on the other 3.
I think these are very, very hasty generalizations.
Yeah, exactly, that's what I'm talking from memory. But this is where I'm taking this from, of like amygdala size is actually is correlated, is connected to
But
emotion.
I am
even
not
such
sure, by the way, about that. Just
Okay,
don't-
yes.
don't-
So
I
like,
won't- I
guys,
won't hold
wait
you
for
to
the next podcast when we do that more in depth.
Sure. I'm just saying, like, even if that study was, meant to have some kind of understanding of how different people work, it's a vast array of people that you're engaging with.
This was specifically
it's not
in American
Right.
politics.
Exactly. So.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. No, but I know. But I mean, like,
So there are no specifics to this population except political opinions, which
Within
can
the-
change in days, by the way.
Let's
No,
get
no,
back
but
to the topic
the
at
point-
hand. Come on,
Right.
because we will get back to it.
Yeah,
There-
yeah.
the-
Do you
the-
have any other points that you want to bring up?
No, except for that, I hope that as gender becomes more fluid, like we were discussing, that the thing that will matter in the workplace is the work that you put in, and not necessarily the gender or anything around it, or the stereotypes.
I thought we agreed that gender cannot become more fluid. It's either already completely fluid or
In people's minds.
well, it doesn't have to be. It
It's
doesn't
not
have to be
conceptual.
completely fluid. I'm just saying, like, whatever degree of fluidity
Yes,
there is,
it's already there.
it either
Yeah.
was
Yeah,
already
yeah.
there,
Yeah, yeah.
and we just discovered it,
No, I'm
or it
just-
was never there,
in
and we've
people's
come up
minds.
with it.
I was talking about this construct.
sure.
Because we can't, like, humans are not social constructs. Like, we can't like reconstruct them and construct them however we like.
Understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what was your point of that? Sorry, I got stuck with this.
So I'm just hoping that as gender becomes a more fluid construct, like I said, in people's minds, so that we think about it in a more fluid manner, that what will end up mattering in a workplace situation is the work that you put in and the success that you have putting in that work, rather than anything else, like your stereotypes, the gender, so on and so forth.
Right. Are there any points that you would like to bring up with that?
Well, I think that a lot of good points were brought up. I just really want to like fight this idea that it's all socialization. I think that people are who they are, and socialization has a very small effect in it. But it doesn't mean women do this and men do this. It's more like people are who they are as individuals, and the socialization isn't nearly as important as people think.
So what you're saying is that with changing trends in markets and how marketing companies,
you're actually seeing a change in the humans.
yes, and how they think. So how is it so much based on individuality if it's also based on socialization?
No, but I'm saying that the trend. No, but that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the trend is a reflection of the choices of the millions of human beings. But these are individual choices that are made individually.
Right.
Of course, they don't live in a vacuum, and those are influenced by the choices of the people around them. So there is an aspect of like groupthink or socialization or something like this. But it's much less influential than what people think. I think that the culture itself is more reflective of who these human beings are to begin with than the other way around, and the culture shaping who the human beings are.
I see.
That because people do what feels good to them, mostly, or they act on instinct a lot more than they give themselves credit for. And that instinct forms their basic ideas and what they think about the world, in addition to what they learn from their peers, who are also acting on instinct for the most part. So I mean, this is very much like most of what we do is already deeply ingrained, and there's a few variations in
You're just
manifestation.
saying everybody acts according to instincts.
I think that everything we do is like a variation on our instincts.
I think
Like
a
it's-
lot
it's-
of
it's-
instincts
it-
are quite suppressed, Virat.
It's like the strongest template for every action we do. Then like the details are the details, and they're all based on environment. But detail is detail. But
Right.
seeking companionship, being with the group. What else? I mean, curiosity. These are all things that exist inherently in human beings.
What's your proof? What's your proof?
Do you have any sources for this? Is what she's asking.
Like I
Is
said,
that-
what's your proof?
Is that a study?
Because these are traits that exist across all cultures.
How does that prove anything?
What do you mean, how does that
And
prove
this is
anything?
the
It proves that
generalization.
it's not linked to socialization, because socialization is different across cultures.
And how do you know it's across all cultures? Have you met all
Mhm.
cultures? Have you
And
seen
is there
all
any
cultures?
study? Is there any study?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You sure?
Okay, what
No,
are
I mean,
they? What are they
find me a
without?
counterexample. I mean, find me a counterexample.
Right, right.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
somebody has a question for you?
Yeah, please.
If socialization has a very small part in how people are,
Mhm.
how do you explain personality and charismatic trait changes in response to significant trauma, an extreme example of socialization?
That's a good example, actually. It's a good
Yeah,
question. Yeah,
yeah.
try this.
Well, I think I think it's in the question. It's extreme. I mean, extreme events require extreme changes and extreme adaptation. Like, that's the reason. That's why trauma exists. It's, it shocks you into completely changing, because the event is that terrible. It's that awful that you need a radical change.
So only traumatic events have a significant impact on
No,
it?
not all. I think people change over time. Like, of course, like I've changed a lot in the last few years. Yeah, I think we all have. But that's also the part we're growing as people, and
How do we grow as people?
no, just our brain is maturing. As you said earlier in the podcast, we're not fully developed until we're 26.
Yes, and what are we influenced by? What is it that makes us grow and mature?
In part, what we eat. In part,
But
our life habits.
cognitively, what influences the cognitive development?
Your cognition is you have it or not. Like you either have a low IQ or you have a high IQ.
What I'm getting at is
You're
that
getting what you're getting at is ideas. And yes, like people can have many more ideas if they share them with other people. I mean, that's what happens. It doesn't develop them cognitively. I mean, that's people often confuse a lack of sophistication with a lack of intelligence, and that's not true. For example, you don't develop cognitively by being exposed to more ideas. You just develop your ideas more.
Right. And I think we sailed far away from our topic, and I think it's time to wind up.
Yeah.
So we had a good podcast, and we had a good discussion with Juwana Jenkins.
Oh yeah.
And
thanks again to her.
thank you.
Thank you,
And
Ms. Jenkins.
have a nice weekend, everybody, and have a nice evening.
And don't forget to come see us at the barbecue event tomorrow from
Right.
4 to 10.
Right.
Please come.
Which is happening at Stromovka Park. And the Mind Matter team has responsibility of grilling. So let's see how that goes.
You can come and grill us with a few questions as well.
Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
please.
That'll be an amazing opportunity to get to know what we actually think
Mhm.
And,
and have better conversations.
Well, those, not what we think. I mean, they can hear us for they'll be listening to what we think for
Yeah,
hours. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. Well,
please
we
tell
want
us
to
what
know.
you think,
Yeah,
and
we
let us know what
I'm
our
sorry.
audience
I'm
is.
sorry. Yeah, I think we have to get to know what they think, and so we have to get to know what are the issues that they are interested in, so that we can bring up relevant issues to have a better discussion and better understanding of what people
And tell
want
us
to know.
whose side you're on.
Right. Thank you so much. Have a good evening and
Toodles,
goodbye.
everyone.
Bye.